I just like when you lose. There's so much. There's so much.
The politics of the Skyrim Civil War are as divisive as, well, modern day politics. It's a debate that's been raging since Skyrim came out in 2011, and it still feels like we haven't reached a consensus in 2025. Now, I've seen a few people boil this conflict down to freedom of religion, with the Stormcloaks, versus freedom of race, with the Empire. But this take greatly dismisses a myriad of external factors, like the Thalmor. It's also tricky to find views on the Civil War that are unbiased because, well, I guess that's what makes the debate so strong. But, as someone clinging to neutrality like the Swiss, and is willing to fight for that neutrality, like the Swiss, I figured I'd try to give you all the information so that you can make a more informed decision on the Civil War. Of course, I can't be 100% objective and will sprinkle some of my own opinion at the end, but let's get started with the lore. Now, to understand the Skyrim Civil War, we need to go back to the Oblivion Crisis, and understand why the Empire was so weak in the first place to allow this to happen. Of course, the Oblivion Crisis led to the end of the Septim dynasty, after Martin Septim dragon-punched Maor's Dagon back to the Deadlands. The after effects of the crisis gave the Empire's enemies the upper hand, or at least the ability to fester and grow. While the Somerset Isles did suffer greatly at the hands of the Daedra, the Thalmor were actually pretty heroic in defending their people and gained power from then on, eventually leading them to become the force we see in Skyrim. The Argonians of Blackmarsh actually thrived during the Oblivion Crisis, at least according to the propaganda we're given, creating Argonian super soldiers to do their best Doomguy impression and rock Oblivion's world. When the crisis ended, Blackmarsh left the Empire, and things only got worse when Potentate Okato, the guy we left in charge of the Empire, got assassinated. Then, well, everything kind of exploded. Largely figuratively, but a little bit literally. When Okato got seized, there was a civil war for the succession to the Ruby Throne, and during this time, a lot of people left the Empire. The period is known as the Stormcrown Interregnum, in which Titus Mede, no, not that one, became Emperor. He did well to stitch the Empire back together, but there was no saving certain parts. Blackmarsh decided to invade Morrowind for a laugh. The Thalmor set off a coup in Valenwood, which led to the formation of the Third Aldmeri Dominion alongside the Somerset Isles. After the Main, the leader of Elsewhere, was assassinated, the province split into two countries, Palatine and Anaquina, which both became vassals of the Aldmeri Dominion. This occurred after the Void Nights, in which the moons vanished, messing up the Khajiit, who are heavily reliant on the moons. The Thalmor took credit for restoring the moons and thus earned the Khajiit's adoration. Now you might be asking why I'm talking about literally everywhere else but Skyrim, however it is important for me to set the scene for the Great War, and to give context to the powers behind the Third Aldmeri Dominion. Because this Great War was the biggest contributing factor to Skyrim's Civil War. Speaking of the Great War, let's get into that, because we've pretty much determined the sides. There's the Third Aldmeri Dominion, including the Somerset Isles, Valenwood and Elsewhere, while the other side is what is left of the Empire, being made up of Cyrodiil, Hammerfell, High Rock and of course Skyrim. Morrowind was busy having the worst time ever, between invading lizards and a mountain exploding, and the lizards in question were pretty happy doing their own thing, so neither of them were really involved in the Great War. Now, the massive disadvantage the Empire had was that Cyrodiil was its heart, and geographically, the easiest to attack through the Aldmeri Dominion's vassal provinces of Valenwood and Elsewhere. Sure, Skyrim, High Rock and Hammerfell certainly pulled their weight and offered their military might, but the fighting would have been on Cyrodiilic soil for the most part. This, along with how weak the Empire was, led to the Imperial City being sacked, with Titus Mede, yes, that one, pulling his main forces back to preserve them. Now, the Aldmeri Dominion believed they had effectively won the war. However, Titus had two big players to help turn the tide. These players were General Decinus, an Imperial who led the legions of Hammerfell, and General Yona, a Nord who had predominantly Nordic forces from Skyrim. They were to join Titus, but he got himself wounded, so an unnamed hero disguised himself as the Emperor to raise morale, and together the three won the day, taking back the Imperial city. This was known as the Battle of the Red Ring, and this battle effectively weakened the Dominion enough to lead a ceasefire, and the Empire had the Red Guards of Hammerfell and the Nords of Skyrim to thank for this victory. The problem was the terms of this ceasefire, the White Gold Concordant. You see, as far as the people of the Empire were concerned, they had managed to get the best out of their vassal provinces, and won a major victory with their now war hero Emperor at the helm. It was all going the Thalmor's way before this, and they had some momentum going into the next stages of the war, but both sides had suffered heavy losses in this battle, and this raises one of the first major questions regarding the Empire's decisions during the Great War. Should Titus Mede have sued for peace in the first place? I mean, probably, since the Imperial city needed to be rebuilt and the Aldmeri provinces hadn't suffered nearly as much, but the terms of the White Gold Concordant heavily disfavoured the Empire, leading to the disbanding and hunting of the Blades, and of course, the outlawing of Talos worship. And this is where Ulfric Stormcloak finally enters the picture. Now, part of the information we have comes from the Thalmor dossier, but I do want to say that I'm pretty sure Ulfric is no ally of the Thalmor. He just so happens to be helping their goals by brewing chaos in Skyrim, but before that, he left his 10 years of training at High Hrothgar to fight in the Great War, but was captured during the campaign in the Imperial city. He was interrogated by Elwyn, and was made to believe that the information they gained from him was needed to capture the Imperial city, when it had actually already fallen, and then allowed him to escape. He then comes back in the Battle of the Red Ring, distinguishing himself as a war hero there, presumably as part of Yona's Nordic army. He then returned to Skyrim after the war, clearly not too happy about the banning of Talos worship.
Objectively, you're a piece of shit and you have shitty taste. I guarantee I could find 1,000 scientific reports to corroborate that it's a fact. You suck.
And it makes a pretty big fuss about it with the Markarth incident. When Ulfric returned home, not yet a Jarl because his Papa Stormcloak was still in charge, he was asked by Hrolfdir, Jarl of Markarth, to deal with the Reachmen who had taken over the hold and declared it an independent kingdom. The Empire was slow to react, given the recent end of a continental war. So Ulfric got his boys together and recaptured the city on the terms that Hrolfdir would allow Talos worship within his hold. Now, we don't know exactly what happened, but many reports suggested that Ulfric basically kicked the door down, FBI style, and went at the Reachmen like a weed whacker against grass, treating the Geneva Convention like the Geneva Suggestions. Of course, like the British government hearing about offensive tweets, the Empire heard of the worship of Talos in Markarth and sent a force immediately to not break the terms of the White Gold Concordant. The chaos didn't help the Empire in its rebuilding, which is what I think the Thalmor meant when they said that Ulfric proved to be an asset in the dossier. Although they did also say he proved to be uncooperative later. Both Ulfric and Hrolfdir got thrown in prison, and whilst in prison, Ulfric's dad passed away, making his son Jarl of Windhelm by succession, and thus he was let out. This led him being disillusioned with the Empire, and when he finally got out, he went home to establish the Stormcloaks, being labelled as a dormant asset by the Thalmor after he refused contact with them. He began skirmishing with the Empire, although his rebellion hadn't caught enough momentum to truly begin a civil war yet. After High King Istlod's death, his son, Torrig, was chosen as High King at the Moot, as was tradition. And while nobody seemed to have anything bad to say about Torrig, he did seem a little green for the role. Now in the Moot, Ulfric basically did a TED talk about Skyrim's independence, in which he bordered on treason. Later, he rolled up to Solitude, where Torrig and his court thought that Ulfric would ask the new High King to declare independence, but instead, he challenged him to a duel, shouted at him, did him in, and fled, effectively beginning the Civil War. But you might be thinking, why did anyone join Ulfric after he just killed Skyrim's High King? Well, you have to understand that declaring the duel and killing Torygg is actually perfectly legal according to the old laws of Skyrim, hence why a lot of traditional holds sided with Ulfric. The problem is, it was a dick move, and illegal as far as the Empire was concerned, hence why the other half of the country sided with the Empire. Now the reason why it's a bit of a dick move is that Ulfric literally could not lose that fight. He's a decorated war hero with the power of the Thu'um. Torygg was a man so green he pissed grass. It's a bit of a hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby situation. But, I mean, skill issue I guess? You're the king of a warrior people, you gotta know how to fight. I also want to point out that Skyrim has been split into two countries before, with it being split into East and West Skyrim during the Second Era. There's also the War of Succession in the First Era, so it isn't like the province is known for its unity. But that's basically how the Civil War got started. I know, it took a while to get here, so here's a quick meme break.
Oh, no, hang on. I've just realised.
What?
I don't want to talk to you anymore.
Now, let's take a closer examination at both sides, since you now know the how, but not as much the why. You might be thinking, logically, wouldn't the best bet to beat the Thalmor, because both sides view them as an enemy, be to bide your time in a unified empire, with strength in numbers? But you have to understand this. Cyrodiil, the empire's heart, was the reason why they were basically on the losing side, and they were at full strength then. If a Great War II started, the empire would be without Hammerfell, because they did what Skyrim wanted to and became independent. You see, the Aldmeri Dominion wanted a large portion of Hammerfell, as part of the White Gold Concordant, and the Redguard said no. They basically didn't stop fighting, so the Empire effectively gave them up, and let them be independent to not violate the terms of the White Gold Concordant. Now, Hammerfell kind of won, because they pushed the Thalmor out and got them to sign a peace treaty. But they got pretty messed up in the process. It wasn't a clear W, but they proved it could be done. Another thing it proved is that the Empire wasn't willing to back its provinces, and that as far as the Red Guards were concerned, the Empire abandoned Hammerfell for Cyrodiil's sake. It's not exactly something that inspires hope if you're an Imperial province outside of Cyrodiil. Also remember that the legions of Hammerfell and Skyrim had a massive impact during the Battle of the Red Ring, and that without either or both, they probably won't get through another Great War. The Nords and the Redguards are known for being a great warrior people. And you can interpret that as a reason for Skyrim to stay, because the Empire needs all the help it can get. Or you can interpret it as a reason to go, so that Skyrim isn't anchored by the Empire when another Great War happens. Now, I'm aware that I'm making Skyrim independent sound like the better option. And perhaps it could be, were it not for one big issue. That issue being Ulfric himself. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I don't actually think that Ulfric is racist. He never speaks ill of his father, from what I can find, who was very tolerant toward the Dark Elves and Argonians, and, to me at least, seems to be driving the anti-foreigner narrative as a propaganda tool, rather than actually believing it. I don't have too much proof, other than the policies of his father, and how I don't feel like there's a massive amount of racism in his actual dialogue, especially compared to his right-hand man, Galmar, and will let you join his cause no matter your race, even if you're an Outmer, and even asks Bretons, who are partially Elven in heritage, for aid, although he does get denied, pointing out that the Empire hasn't actually done anything bad to Hyrule before, especially compared to Hammerfell and Skyrim. Now I do want to preface that it's just a feeling, but either way he is fanning the flames in Skyrim, and the reason why Ulfric's still kind of brought up now, 14 years later, is that he's sort of egging on what we're seeing across the world at the moment with the anti-foreigner sentiment. Hold on a second, did I just compare Skyrim politics to the real world? My god, it's the end days. But yeah, this kind of anti-foreigner Skyrim that Ulfric is building isn't so appealing. Although Ulfric isn't stupid. Remember, he asked the Bretons for help for a reason, and would maybe look at an alliance with Hammerfell if he became High King, because that's the smart thing to do as an independent Skyrim. He's a tactical man, but Ulfric's biggest flaw is that he's power hungry, and this should be the main argument against him in my opinion. You see, while Ulfric has been cunning since the day he came back to Skyrim, he's not been the wisest. If his objective was pure, and to make an independent and strong Skyrim, he should have done what Torog thought he was going to do, and asked him to declare Skyrim independent when he went to Solitude. This was on the cards, since Torog was said to respect Ulfric, and at the end of the day, Ulfric is both a war hero and the Jarl of Ysgramor City, two factors giving him massive authority. He could have ended up as Torog's main general, and we don't really know if the late High King was pro-Imperial or pro-Skyrim independence, because he's dead, and everyone that would have been on his side is immediately anti-Ulfric because Ulfric's the guy who killed him. But we do know that he worshipped Talos, and if Ulfric could have convinced him, he would have made a unified, independent Skyrim far mightier than the one that he would probably make if he wins the war. Ulfric's actions also mean that the alternative ruler, who would be the High Queen, Elisif, would be weak. Let's be honest, Elisif is not fit to be a Jarl, let alone a High Queen. She does not know what she's doing, and Falk Firebeard does most of the work. Not that it's her fault. She's young, inexperienced, and was never meant to be a Jarl, let alone a High Queen. And while she's massively pro-Imperial, she also asked the Dragonborn to make an offering to Talos for her late husband.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So, what's the right choice between the two? Well, there isn't one. Choosing between the Stormcloaks and the Imperials isn't about who's right, it's about choosing the lesser evil. Should Skyrim stay with an ailing empire that has proven it can't beat the Aldmeri Dominion, especially now that it won't have Hammerfell's help? Or should it be independent under a power-hungry man who, while he is a competent general, might not have the country's best intentions at heart? Choosing neither side is valid, but a continuation of the war is what the Thalmor wants, since it weakens Skyrim and the Empire simultaneously. The only saving grace is that it's hard for the Thalmor to make a move against Skyrim with the Dragonborn there, since our protagonist should, canonically, be able to defeat armies alone, if what we hear about Talos is anything to go by. Plus, if you need the help, you can summon dragons and get the sun to shoot people with a warrior's bow. Make no mistake, as the Dragonborn, essentially another Talos, you're the Thalmor's enemy by default. They want you gone. Now, if you're Skyrim, the country, another big thing you gotta think about is that if you stay with the Empire, you could be thrown under the bus, or I guess the carriage, like the people of Hammerfell were, and be independent without a choice. Now, if you do gain independence, you're now enemies with both the Empire and the Thalmor, and without any easy alliances, you could be in for a rough time. So ultimately, I hope you guys have learned a little something about the Skyrim Civil War with this video, and I'm curious to see what side you pick, if this video has told you something new. I've tried to be as neutral as possible here, although that's pretty much impossible, especially because I am very anti-Thalmor. I mean, they're meant to be the enemy in the game. They make an enemy of you whether you like it or not. Now, are you still pro-Stormcloak or pro-Empire? Let me know, and try not to bring too much real-world politics here, please. I know there are parallels, but let's try to keep this Elder Scrolls related. Especially because most of you are from the US and I don't really know what's going on over there. We've got too much of a mess in the UK for me to really focus on anywhere else politically. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe, whatever, you've heard it a million times before, and hopefully I'll see you in another video.
The wolves trod upon the great Jorrvaskr to meet the sons of Ysgramor. They said, "What are you but a harbinger to leave us hopeless and forlorn?" The wolf bore its fangs and spread its claws and tore at its own hide. Drink the blood and become my sons, or by dawn you'll never survive. And so the pack was born again as the wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight's bound hunter. And And so the pack was born again as the wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight star.